welcome to the MessianTics podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby. Hey guys, thanks for joining us for another episode as we dive into a little bit further this conversation on the fellowship model versus maybe a more organized structural concept like a denomination or something along those lines. And I don't know, maybe even the word versus in the middle there is not the right way to look at it. Maybe some sort of a hybrid of the two or something's a route to go. I don't know. But nonetheless, as we continue this conversation, we wanted to dive into a few other issues that are very pertinent to this conversation. And one of those is, especially for me, and I know both Rabbi Eric and I have assistant rabbis. Rabbi Toby, Rabbi Jonathan are assistant rabbis at our congregations, and have been phenomenal tools and resources for us, and filled in as a tremendous blessing in our community. And so, as a person who grew up in Messianic Judaism myself, but also someone who has very literally kind of climbed the rung, I guess you could say, in leadership training and working under different congregations and all, is one of the things I really thought would be a valuable conversation is the idea of raising up new leaders, getting them plugged in to different congregations and avenues of ministry for experience and things like that. And one of the things I was thinking about as we were kind of tossing this idea around is, one of the things we've seen in the Messianic movement, I think it's in the body as a whole, like we see it all the time. I'm not picking on Messianic Judaism per se, but one of the things that I think we see in Messianic Judaism is kind of this territorial attitude, but also this, these are my people. This is my, a young person in my congregation has been with me for, 8, 10, 15 years. Like, this is my talent, my person. I've invested all of this and I want them in my congregation. And sometimes we may not even have an idea that we're thinking that way, but we don't want to lose anybody. We don't, we're afraid of sheep stealing and whatever. And we end up wasting the calling that people have in their life. And I've watched a lot of people in my age range and my generation growing up in the movement who felt like they had a calling towards something more. They were maybe in youth ministry and felt like they were supposed to be a rabbi or what have you. And because the congregation they were in didn't have a place for them to serve in a role to get experience and training, they just kind of were left to the wayside and ultimately have kind of faded away from Messianic Judaism from it. And so I think it's this conversation on raising up leaders and giving avenues and opportunity for training and experience is a very valuable thing. I know one of the things that I've personally benefited from a lot myself is that I have worked under rabbis in five different states and in multiple different congregations under 5 different rabbis, 6 different rabbis, something like that, before starting our congregation. So I've seen a lot of what to do, what not to do, a lot of what works, a lot of what doesn't work in different environments or different regions and areas of the country and what have you. And so I think it's a valuable conversation to have as to how to better strategize within Messianic Judaism as organizations on how we can better facilitate raising up new leaders.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think would be helpful, and again, we're dealing with the fellowship versus or the differences and the pluses and minuses between a fellowship organization or a denomination, is that in a denomination there is a more structured mechanism for raising up leaders, and it crosses congregations and communities and states and regions in that process. So, for instance, if you're from the average congregation in the United States, regardless of denomination, structure, whatever faith it is, most congregations have less than 50 people in them. And so if you have a congregation that has 50 people in it, the chances of raising up someone from within your congregation from that pool is much slimmer. And so sometimes out of necessity, we use people without a calling because there's a spot to fill. Where if you look at things as in our region, and I'm just talking the Gulf Coast region, not the entire Southeast region, there's 6 congregations that all fellowship together. And so now the pool for called people gets a little deeper, a little wider, a little broader in looking for. And then when you go beyond just looking there to, I know that Rabbi David is attending the King's University in Messianic Jewish Studies. And so there's a group of people that are there at the university who are there because they feel a calling, or at least believe they have a calling toward ministry. So there's a pool, not just a pool of people that attend a congregation, but now you have a pool that actually has a calling to reach out to use. Where if you were in like the Assembly of God or Baptist, Southern Baptist, whatever, where they have these colleges, they actively go and recruit for people to serve in these schools so that they can get people that have a calling and expressed a desire and so on to do that. And so when I look around...
And they provide perks, like the college that I went to for undergrad was a school ran by a specific denomination. And if you, after graduating, if you went into their ordination process and you got fully ordained with them, then they went back and paid off your tuition, your student loans or whatever, and potentially could pay for your grad school or what have you, but they would pay off your education.
Right, and if I look just around the southeast region of the United States, the organizations that we fellowship with, both the Union and the IMCS, very few of the congregations have a succession plan, a what happens next plan. And many of the rabbis are 60s, 70s, some 80s that are leading these congregations that don't have set in place what happens when I'm no longer able to do this. And so having a more structured program would allow for this recruiting, this the pool becomes larger instead of smaller, narrower. It becomes more kingdom-minded instead of my congregation-minded, all of those things.
I think it's important for... it's got to be more when you're talking about raising up leaders within congregations. And I know every congregation is different. You know, I don't want to like make this like a blanket criticism, because I do think there are some congregations that just don't have that resource at this time, you know. But in my experience, if a leader of a congregation is truly looking for support and a plan to raise up, like if a rabbi is looking for a plan to raise up an assistant rabbi, or just some kind of plan of succession, whether it's an older rabbi that wants a plan of succession, or David is young. I mean, he's younger than me actually by a couple years, I think. You know, and David was looking for support and to enhance his the ministry that God had given him. And also, David, David always talks about nobody wants it to be a one-man show. I think nobody in their right mind does. But I think there are people that do enjoy that. But what I'm saying is, like, I know somebody who goes to a congregation and their response to at least, an assistant rabbi type idea was, well, we have a team of like 5 guys that speak once a month. I'm like, okay, so you have a team of 5 guys that speak. But the difference between a team of 5 guys or a group of guys that speak so the rabbi can do whatever, have a break, is the congregation is not visibly seeing an empowerment of an individual, whether it's by the laying on of hands or, the difference is like, and this is still very difficult for me, I'm just going to be honest with you, like at our congregation at CMC, and this is Rabbi Toby, by the way, I know I've been talking a few minutes, but I still have a hard time being called rabbi. I mean, I still have like that's still surreal to me and weird, and people come up to me. But the reason why people call me rabbi and stuff is because David has conferred through the Lord a level of authority to me. And if the congregation doesn't witness that, they're not going to see a person that speaks up there like they have any level of authority. So it's still just going to be like, well, the rabbi's out of town,
Yeah. Oh, it's just Fred or Jake or whatever, And
And now the senior rabbi might look at it as like, oh, see, I'm giving up the pulpit, I'm giving up the bema, right? Yeah. But I'm like, but you're not really empowering that individual, and the congregation is not looking at that person like they have any measure of authority. So if something does happen to you, or if God comes in and says, hey, I want you to go here, how is the congregation used to be used to seeing like Moses anointed, like Moses anointed? Yeshua sent them out 2 by 2, with the power of the Spirit.
When Moses with Joshua. Like we watch, like Moses and Joshua, like that is discipleship. That is where we get like the founding idea. Like, and like all of Israel knew Joshua was in charge.
Yeah, he had been a part. And I just want to say, I hope I'm contributing to the conversation by saying there has to be a formal and deliberate. I'm not talking about a ceremony. I'm saying there has to be a deliberate. The congregation has to see the senior leader confer authority to called men and women.
Yeah, it's a real thing, and that we can quantify actually when we look at it. For instance, at our synagogue, before Rabbi Jonathan became the assistant, if I wasn't there and one of the elders was speaking or someone was speaking, it was not unheard of for people to actually just get up and leave.
Right, I've seen that too.
Or for them not to come if they knew I wasn't going to be there.
We used to. I would not announce when I wasn't going to be. So like my team would know, hey, next week I'm not going to be here and so speaking, but we wouldn't announce it to the congregation because same thing. Like the cat's away, the mice will play. Like they just wouldn't show up.
Right, and so but now since this event, since the conferring of that authority, since raising Jonathan publicly and saying, this is my assistant rabbi and this is Rabbi Jonathan and his wife is Rebbitzin Catherine, and they've been conferred this position. Now, if I'm not there for a week, we basically have the same attendance. Right. But you're right, it makes a difference in the mindset of the people in that authority.
It's the responsibility of a senior leader to not allow their congregation to fall into the dangerous place of centering and gathering around a cult of personality.
Yeah. And honestly, this ties into our last conversation on proactive reactive ministry. You guys were both talking about how there are congregations that maybe they don't have the size and they don't have the ability and they don't have. Rabbi Eric, you brought up the idea that there are a lot of, which we've talked about in past episodes, that there are a lot of congregations that don't have a succession plan, and what are you going to do? And the fact that in having a conversation in Messianic Judaism about intentionally raising up new leaders and sowing into their calling, their gifts, their talents, so that they can be productive in their calling, the fact that we have to tie that to a succession plan. Like, and when I bring this conversation up about raising new leaders, like I'm not talking about specifically about raising up leaders under me to take over my congregation if God calls me out or I die or whatever. I mean, that's a part of it. Like that needs to be a part of the proactive vision, being looking forward. But like at the same time, it also needs to be a part of people in our congregation. If I got 50, 60 people, if I've only got 40 people in my congregation, there's somebody else there that has a call in their life for congregational ministry that even if I can't afford to give them a salaried role, I can't afford not to sow into them towards that calling, because you know what? That could be an investment in the rest of the kingdom. That may not be somebody that stays long term with me, but that I can build up and send out. Oh, you know what? I got an email. I get emails on a regular basis. Rabbi Eric, you get the same things. Emails on a regular basis. Such and such a congregation is looking for an associate rabbi or a new senior leader, or looking for this or that. Well, if we actually had an intentional network to train up leaders, to sow into leaders, to build them up, give them experience and time in a pulpit and so on. We also in that would have the network that when you wouldn't have to send a blast out to every congregation, you send an email out to one specific department in that organization, and that department goes, here's 5 names that would work really well in your area that are well trained and ready to go. Here are 5 names, and here's another 10 that aren't quite there yet, but if you're willing to invest another 2 or 3 years, they will be there.
Right, and the other side of that we spoke briefly about before is that congregations, if you have a structured organization, then you can have funding for. So there's a congregation that has 40 or 50 people, so they may not be able to afford to give a salary to somebody to be the assistant rabbi. But if you have 150 congregations that are all networked together, you can raise the money to be able to give to support those people, even if it's not a full salary, at least something giving them so that they know that they're valued in the greater community, so this can happen.
And if you give legitimate opportunity for experience and training, a legitimate value to who that individual is and their calling, you don't actually have to worry. I know a lot of rabbis have this fear. Well, if I and the fear is valid because it's happened. Like, I don't want to say it doesn't or hasn't happened, but this fear, if I bring an assistant or an associate rabbi in, are they going to split my congregation? Are they going to try to push me out? Are they going to coerce a coup? Are they going to? Well, if we are actually investing as an organization, but also locally as an individual congregation, and that we don't have to fear so much about that. If you're giving them legitimate experience, legitimate time, legitimate training, one of the things that I really respect Rabbi Toby for, and I was in this place and would have been fine staying there too if it had been what God had for me. But when Rabbi Toby had his ordination interview with the IMCS, one of the questions that he was asked is, a lot of guys that are coming in as assistants or associates or whatever, like, they're just looking at it as a stepping stone. They want to be the head guy, the senior guy. He goes, if it's God's will that you're kind of just stuck as the number 2 man under Rabbi David for years to come, are you going to be okay with that? And Toby's answer was, I didn't want to do what I'm doing now. This was a God thing. Like, if this is all God's got for me, I'm perfectly happy and comfortable serving God in this place, in this way forever. And I think if we're actually intentionally raising people up, you'll get a lot more attitude like that. I'm perfectly comfortable being number 2. I would have been David Rosenberg's number 4 forever and would have been perfectly happy with that. Like, I loved serving under David Rosenberg and still consider him my rabbi.
And I think, and Jonathan and Toby will have to answer better than this because they're actually in that position and I'm not. But if we make the assistant rabbi position only the waiting zone, the batter, what do they call it in baseball? The on deck, the on deck spot for when the rabbi leaves or dies, then their value is only in taking over.
Yeah. Right.
But if we make an assistant rabbi being what Toby said, Rabbi David didn't come in so this is a succession plan, but a growth plan.
Right.
This is a position we need so that we can expand our base, not congregationally so much, although that's the result of it, but ministry-wise. There's more can be done. There's more access. There's more availability, those things. If we can change the mindset in Messianic Judaism to where an assistant rabbi or even multiple assistant rabbis are part of a structure of congregation and not just, I'm putting this in place so that when I croak, my sheep aren't left without a shepherd.
And it works in the church world. I mean, you look at mega churches that have
30 pastors.
Yeah, 30 pastors. But they all have a distinct purpose. They all have a role that they're playing, and they're all comfortable in that role. Now, I'm not saying having 30. Like, one of the things for me in that environment is I always say if my flock has to go through 15, 20 shepherds before they finally get to the shepherd, like, then they don't have a relationship with their shepherd and they can't know the shepherd's voice.
Yeah, like
I have a question, and I want you guys to feed into what he was just talking about, and to play off of this too. But I have a question because this is something that both of our congregations have experienced within the last couple of years, and something you've talked about before, Rabbi Eric, that every new person you've added to the staff basically amplify the potential for growth of the congregation. And I'm not talking numerical growth as the only categorical quantifier. I'm talking numerical growth, spiritual growth, etc. in the congregation. bringing in an assistant rabbi and establishing that assistant rabbi, and I can speak to this, Rabbi Toby can speak to this in our congregation, what have you guys seen in terms of the kind of ROI on the return of investment on bringing in that assistant rabbi and establishing that role?
I'm going to answer briefly, and then if you'll go ahead and speak to the whole thing. But I can tell you at our congregation, since we brought Rabbi Jonathan in, we've doubled in size. And not just in numbers, but in what we're doing, what our activities, the different ministries, the outreach, the things going on. Yeah. So the numerical and the ROI of bringing him in was significant in our congregation. So go ahead and give a whole scoop now.
Yeah, because I think the reason it doubles is because it doubles the ability for a teacher to be involved in the lives of the congregation. So for example, we've all been to churches where you're not talking to the pastor after service. There's behind a wall. There's no way you're getting to say, "Hey, thank you for a great message." There's just absolute even if you wrote a review and dropped a review packet in the box, the odds of that pastor seeing your handwritten note are probably slim to none. Yeah. But when you have the ability to go and sit at Oneg, for example, I don't even get to talk. We have enough people now where I don't even get to talk to everyone on Shabbat. I try, but I don't get to interact with, because sometimes I get caught up in conversations, so I don't get to interact with everyone. But so I think that's one thing, is people feel like they have a connection to the leadership of the congregation. They feel like they are connecting with the people who are teaching from Scripture and leading Bible studies and Torah studies during the week. So it's not just there's not just one person up on stage. They're actually able to have connections with people who they know are praying for them, who they know are preparing teachings to be able to help them in their walk with Hashem and in their walk with their neighbors and their families. It's not just a one-off thing, because if it's a one-off thing, it's real easy to not participate in that and to not to walk away from that. It's it's why there's so many congregations that when it's just one leader overstraining themselves, you're gonna people do walk away, people do leave. People, if they're still in that camp of I'm on church on Sunday, Shabbat on Saturday, they're possibly, they may stop coming to services as regularly on Shabbat, but start going more on Sunday and just maybe staying at home with their family on Shabbat because they know they're not making those connections. We're able to do more. Because, Thursday Torah study COVID killed that for a while. But, that's way out of your way to go over to Pace to do Thursday Torah study. But now that, because I go home that way every day, it's super easy. And even if I wasn't going home that way, with many hands make light work, and so it's much easier for us to do more studies during the week, and that way more people are reached, more people are engaging with the community. And even if they're not there every time, all the time, the option is still there. Whereas if it was just Rabbi David or just Rabbi Eric, you're one person, right. You can't do as much by yourself.
So I'm going to ask both of you to go back to earlier part of the conversation. How were you received as assistant, and what the perception of the idea that you're an addition, not a replacement concept with all of that? So whichever one of you, Rabbi Toby or Rabbi Jonathan, want to. And the reason I'm bringing this is because I think that the more structured type organization allows better for feeding into this concept.
I was received. It was really overwhelming how well I was received, because, and Rabbi David and I had a lot of those conversations about, my wife and I, Brooke, we had known David for years before we came here, before we even knew we were even coming here. They were two of our closest friends. But once we knew what God was doing, we were visiting, about once a month, because we lived in Georgia. Yeah. But still just coming and visiting and stuff. And David had been sharing with the congregation about what was happening. But still, even with the rabbi sharing, hey, we're going to bring this people in. The rubber doesn't meet the road until we get there And I was really nervous about taking on some things, and that's another thing, and that's probably for another episode, about putting these things into application, because David set up a process for me and Brooke to enter in gradually even after we moved here. And that really helped us. But I was overwhelmed. But you see, you can't really quantify this, and you can't manufacture it. You can only train leaders to do what like David has done or what Rabbi Eric has done, and that's for their congregation to receive in open arms or an assistant rabbi, someone that you're going to call me rabbi, and you're going to listen to what God has to say by his grace through me from the Bema, and you're going to listen to me, and you're going to sit, again, by God's grace. Yeah. I'm just saying, it's because of how David never made, because I hate to say this, one of the pitfalls of leadership is you make everything about you. And you go from being a channel of God's Spirit and a channel of God's authority at times to lording that over, which the Scripture warns about, like, don't lord your authority.
Yeah.
But that connects with what I said earlier about a cult of personality.
Yeah.
You know, if a congregation, and what I mean, guys, if you're listening, what's a cult of personality? It means when a place, a congregation, church, synagogue, it is that leader.
Yeah.
It is everything is centered around that pastor, everything is about what they do.
If that leader goes away,
it's over.
Yeah.
Everything is about, right, our pastor, our rabbi, right? And that is a very, very dangerous place to be. And only the leader can make it not about themselves. That is our first responsibility. And one of the sayings I always have to other leaders and to people who are coming up in leadership, I said, it's not how you use your authority, it's how you don't.
Yeah.
That I truly believe, as I said, I think that's one of the things that makes a leader a leader. It's not what you can do. It's almost how you don't do it. Yeah. And look at Yeshua, how he didn't use his agency, how he didn't use his authority when he came the first time. But so I think how I was received and my wife was received speaks to how David led a congregation for 10 years before we came and never made it about himself. Never. Always said, I must decrease.
Yeah.
Even as the senior leader of a place, this is about the Lord, So that's my experience. Yeah. And still is my experience. And I respect David for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was received really well. I mean, it was a little of both. Like I was received very well. I mean, there were some people who were kind of standoffish that have warmed up to me very nicely over the past, I've been here 2.5 years now. And there's the people who were kind of standoffish to me in the beginning have really warmed up to me now, and I actually have good conversations with them. But you can tell when some people are like, I don't know, who's this young
right? You always have that
thing, coming in here.
And I get that too, but
yeah. I was 24 when I came here, I think, 25, something like that. Mm-hmm. So very, very young, but. Yeah, I was received very well, and it did help that it was a big I was called up publicly. Rabbi Eric, Pammy, which is Rabbi Eric's wife, Rebetz and Pammy, and the elders that were there that Shabbat came up, laid hands on me, and prayed over me to take up that role that I was being called into, and then off we went, and I started. Kind of feet to the fire. It was oh my gosh, it was crazy. Because I came down right after Sally. The street lights weren't even working when I came down here. The traffic lights. It was like you came to the Davis and Olive Road, which is a massive intersection, and it was giant four-way stop for forever. But I came and we did, because here we do 2 services for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then. Just those 2. The Sukkot, we just do the one.
But Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, 2 services each.
So we came, and it was I was speaking at Rosh Hashanah, and then of course right after Rosh Hashanah was over, we were out clearing logs and trees in people's yards for the congregation, and then I actually brought my chainsaw down with me from where I'd been living previously. So it was so I was received very well, and and I was allowed to do things incrementally, so. I was speaking, I think every other month or something. Now Rosh Hashanah, I spoke Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur 2 different times, and then.
Right, but I know I'm interrupting, but it's an important point. The reason he spoke at both of those holy days is that in traditional Judaism, those are like the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
This is this is the one that everybody comes to, that if people are going to come, they're going to come to that.
Yeah.
And it was a purposeful thing to say, this is the assistant rabbi. He's getting to speak at these big. It's not he only gets to speak when I'm not here, or he only gets to speak.
Yeah.
But
he's here now, and he's working.
Right, he's here, and he's part of. This is a full immersion thing. So while he wasn't given all of the obligations regularly to where he spoke every week or every month, he was given these purposely to say, again, this is a Joshua thing. This was he's got this role.
Rabbi Eric brought up a great point that I didn't even think about, that I feel if the senior rabbi should be there when other people, especially someone they're raising up as an assistant, if the senior rabbi is never there, it's going to be what Eric said, which is, this is just coming in so he can go do that. Just David's presence in the synagogue when I'm up says so much to the congregation, and that has been, I think, vital to, again, why I've been received so well. I'm just glad Rabbi Eric brought that up.
Yeah, and for a little while when I was speaking at first, especially like that little chair that's up there that Joe sits in and plays bass on, you would just like plop in that little seat behind me. Then I'd be speaking, but you'd be sitting up there on the stage. But and then over time, like, it was like, actually my first Tuesday night, which is our Bible study night here at the synagogue, was like. Was kind of an emergency. Like, you were teaching something, but then got stuck somewhere. Someone was in a car accident or something, and then you were like, "Hey, are you ready? Can you do it Tuesday night?" I was like, I got something I can do. I got a hip pocket, training I can do real quick, and so started doing Tuesday nights, and ever since then we've just been kind of off and on, but incrementally. But it was always purposeful. I was purposefully, put up to do things like, hey, you're going to do this. You're going to speak here on this. And so it was, I was received well. And even those who may have been kind of, I'm not so sure about this guy.
But it was a purposeful thing to not make Rabbi Jonathan seem like the second string.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the backup.
Yeah.
But that he was put into places on high holidays, on special days, on things, so that people wouldn't see him as, he's the fallback guy.
Yeah. Not the Beau Rivage strategy.
Right. Because if you are pouring into the right person who's called, and they're truly called, as I know Jonathan and myself were, submission to authority, is something that should already have been seen.
Yeah.
Before you bring that person in, because of course I do submit. I mean, he's my rabbi too, just like the rest of the congregation.
Yeah.
So and that's an unspoken thing, but it's important to talk about that. I submit to his authority, and if he tells me to do something, and that's another part of it. I mean, David. We have moments where David's like, "Hey, you were doing this. This is something you need to think about not doing."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, you got it."
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that don't focus on that, and because I have had people I've talked to, friends, and who their thing is like, well, I'm gonna be under this leader unless they disagree with me about this, and then I
can't imagine that. You're not ready for it then.
Well, that's what I was telling them. I'm like, then you have not learned what submission is yet. You have failed that lesson so far.
Right. And one of the things that I think is in this connecting and understanding is that having a more structured organization not only provides for a mechanism to feed assistants and others into congregational development plans, but it also provides a mechanism for reversing that process. In other words, if you bring somebody up and they aren't working and they aren't doing it, sometimes if you're just there by yourself, you look and you say, this is all I've got. I can't get rid of them, because if I get rid of them, I don't have anything. And it's going to cause, where if you have a structure set up where you have people to turn to that can come in and mediate, that can come in and try to help, or that can help to remove somebody where it isn't an explosion and a splitting of congregations.
Yeah, and there might could even be a process, kind of like we've talked about before, with having high school or college students, rotate through, having it to where, like, okay, these young leaders are able to, kind of like you did, David, where you actually spent several years going to different congregations and working under different rabbis intentionally. And I think that would be good too. That way there's no, it's sort of like, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, there was a talk brought up at the rabbis conference this past year where someone used a slogan. It was the
Army slogan.
I think it's also the Air Force's, which is mission first, people always. And so they kind of were talking about that. And I was talking to David afterwards. I found it humorous that, we will use the military slogan, but we won't actually look at some of the models the military presents with leadership. And one of those is you rotate leadership, especially junior leadership, like a junior officer, second lieutenant, first lieutenant. You're gonna go through a couple different leadership positions. You might be within the same large organization, brigade, division level, but you'll probably get platoon time. And if you don't get platoon time, you're going to get some kind of specialist option. So for example, I had a friend who he wasn't in charge of a platoon, but he was in charge of a forward observer unit. That's just a few guys. It's not quite a platoon size. But then you rotate through. Then you may get a platoon after that. And then after that, maybe you get stuck in an XO position. So now you're not actually in charge of a bunch of men. You're actually more of an administrative, so you're trying different things. And the similar thing with having junior leaders rotate through different synagogues, different rabbis. Every rabbi is going to have a different way of doing things, and I think that kind of actually answers the question we talked about how do places retain some self-autonomy even within a denomination. Mm-hmm. Leaders are just different. Voices are different. You're always going to have a more local regional identity because just of who's in charge. And so to be able to figure that out and experience and interact with different people, well, by the time you're 30, is going to set you up with a whole toolkit of different abilities and how to handle certain problems that had you not done that, you would have been lost on how to handle.
So a couple of things that I want to hit on is, number one, we said it early in this episode that there is kind of, whether it's vocalized or not, there's definitely an underlying fear in a lot of senior leaders that if I raise up or bring in a person as a rabbinic intern or assistant rabbi, associate rabbi, and put them in that role, that maybe they'll burn me, maybe they'll take the place of the coup, maybe they'll split the congregation, maybe they'll whatever, right? And those things have happened. Some of that is legitimate fear from legitimate experience, and I get that. I'm not trying to second guess that or eliminate it or water it down. But what I do want to say is we can't let those negative experiences, those negative situations, keep us from actually moving forward anyways. And if you're a congregational leader who has experienced a split or has experienced a coup or something like that by an assistant rabbi or what have you, don't let that bad experience or experiences. I know there's one particular rabbi that said, I've had this happen to me numerous times, and maybe it's time to reevaluate you too. That's I'm just going to throw that out there, but don't let those negative experiences be something that robs you of doing what you're supposed to. I mean, imagine if you brought up Korach. Imagine if Aaron and Moses were like, all right, well, Korach tried to, steal everything away. Miriam and Aaron tried to steal everything. Well, I'm not going to bother with Joshua. Joshua's just going to try to do the same thing. Where would we be at? Right. Imagine if Elijah did the same thing with, why am I going to waste time on Elisha or Yeshua? Why am I going to waste time on these people, right?
Peter denied me. And I can't believe it.
Why am I going to waste my time?
And I think Scripture, just to add to your point, David, Scripture gives us an example of what happens to someone who's afraid of losing their authority, and it's King Saul. I mean, he feared David. And Saul had his own issues, but what I'm saying is that if you read about Saul, he was afraid of losing the crown. If you look at David and his issues, he was afraid of losing the Holy Spirit.
Jezebel too. That's a whole, people use that all the time for to talk about maybe women who have stronger voices than they care for, but really it's actually more, the Jezebel spirit's more about losing authority, losing influence.
I just thought of that when you said that about Saul.
And so I want to encourage you, if you're a congregational leader, don't let those bad experiences or the things you've heard of others' bad experiences rob you or rob others of your opportunity to sow into people's lives, sow into the kingdom, because it's not my show, it's not Rob Eric's show, it's not you guys. This isn't our kingdoms. This is his kingdom. And then the other thing that I want to throw out there along the same kind of train of thought is, and I'm gonna say right out the gate as a caveat, these are my thoughts. I'm not speaking for the group. Okay. These are my thoughts, and maybe you guys agree with me, maybe you don't, and that's fine. Just so nobody else gets washed down the gully with this one. When
is this going to diverge kind of from what we've been talking about?
No. Okay. Not yet. So I think part of the solution, we keep talking in this series on, fellowship versus more structured denominational kind of a thing. Honestly, I think we actually have a ready-made solution in hand if we would just be willing to open our minds up a little bit and see it. Now, in a perfect world, I think it'd be easy to do. It's not a perfect world, and neither are perfect organizations, but I think that the UMJC, the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, and the IMCS, the International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues, which our congregation is a part of both, I think both have potential solutions to all of the issues we've discussed thus far in the series. Mm-hmm. And I think, like, for instance, the Union is really, really good at intentionally raising up leaders. And that's a huge thing that the Alliance can learn from. The Alliance is really good at a lot of things that the Union can learn from, and so on and so forth. And I think, honestly, my opinion, again, caveat, my opinion, I think the Messianic Jewish movement would be 1,000 times better if we stopped having the division between the two, and perfect world scenario, they became one organization, bringing their unique strengths to the discussion to bolster a better Messianic Jewish congregational rabbinic organization. And I know there's going to be a lot of IMCS rabbis are going to come back with flack, and a lot of Union rabbis are going to come back with flack, and I get that. Like, I know there's a past, I know there's history, I know there's all kinds of stuff that goes on in the background that most people don't even know about. But the reality is, we've already said it, this isn't a Union kingdom and it isn't an Alliance kingdom. This isn't a Mayim Chaim kingdom and a Brit Am kingdom. This is God's kingdom.
I feel like
this is a Messianic Jewish movement. And almost all of the issues we've discussed in this single episode on raising up leaders could be solved if both organizations brought what they both uniquely are good at into one big, giant organization, one super organization, whatever you want to call it, and very literally Pinky in the Brain this thing that took over the whole world. Like, we could do it if we got out of our way, right? Yeah. John 17, I've talked about it before on this show. John 17, Yeshua says that the world will know that he was sent by God if we are in unity. When they see us in unity as he and the Father are one. And we're not. Like, I'm not even dealing with the rest of the body right now. Messianic Judaism is broken. It's divided. It's torn apart. And usually over dumb things. Like, yes, some are more traditional and some are less. Some are more charismatic and some are more this or that or whatever. Those, we can have the individuality, like Rabbi Jonathan was bringing up, and Michael had asked, a listener had asked about, well, if you have this structured organization, how do you keep your uniqueness, your individuality, your autonomy, etc.? I think this is how. We come together and we work as one unit on the areas that we are in agreement on, and the things that we aren't in agreement on, let's leave autonomy to those congregations. You want your congregation to be hyper-Orthodox? Great, go for it. But you know what? We agree on Yeshua, we agree on the Spirit, we agree on this, we agree on, let's come together in the middle. And your congregation has the autonomy to do that. My congregation has the autonomy to do this. Let's figure this out. But instead of working against each other or in competition with each other or whatever, we could do so much more. We could be so much stronger if we just got out of our own way.
I tell people that Rabbi David is a better rabbi than I am. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that because he's my son or to blow smoke or anything, but I think that because he was exposed to multiple synagogues in his training and his preparation, that he doesn't have the same myopic view of how a synagogue should run or what the structure should be or how things are done or not done. And he's experienced things in his training that I didn't experience. Now, I went through all kinds of things with my congregation, but that's my congregation, and he's sat under and assisted at numerous rabbis, so he got to watch the strengths and weaknesses, the differences in format and style, all of those things. And if the IMCS and the union leaders would see their differences as a strengthening of possibility and put their interns through a cycle where they went to different congregations as they were being raised up to see how different people do different things. It frustrates me at times. I have people from my congregation that end up having job transfers or move. And I get an email that says, hey, I went and visited this congregation, but they're nothing like Brit-Am, or we just don't feel, and like I want to, say, yeah, I know they're not, but they're not supposed to be Brit-Am. They're supposed to be whatever congregation they are.
Yeah. Right.
Find your place there. Find your calling there. If God moved you there, then there's a purpose for you to be there and learn how to work within that structure, so you'll bring what you have from here there to strengthen them. And so there's that goes on. And one other thing I wanted to say, and this is flipping just a little bit, so I apologize for that. If you're a senior leader and you bring someone in as an assistant or as a helper or as a rabbi within your congregation, be honest with them. If you, like when we hired Jonathan, we said, it's our ultimate goal to have somebody who will eventually take over my position, but right now all we're looking for is someone that will walk alongside me and teach and share and shepherd with what's going on. So he didn't come into this. I've seen over and over rabbis bring people in and say, we have a 5-year plan, and then on year number 6 the person still hadn't transitioned into anything, and that person then starts thinking, well, this is never going to happen, or this is
frustrating.
Right, and it gets frustrating. And so be honest. If you're looking for somebody because you have a plan to leave in 5 years, then let that be known. But if all you're doing is looking for someone to walk alongside you, let that be known and be honest about it and upfront, so you're not frustrating that person, and so that person isn't in their mind formulating what they're going to change and do in this. When once I get my reins freed, once he lets go of the reins and I get to run with it as my thing, how is this going to be? And so be honest, because in a lot of the cases where I've seen splits happen, it was that caused it. It was, well, they're never going to do. I have a 5-year plan. Well, I don't feel released yet, so it'll be another 3 years or another 5 years or whatever. Yeah. And just be honest with the person when you're bringing them in, and they won't have that feeding into it.
Yeah, I'm perfectly glad to have you hold the reins on so many things, because I'm like, there's so many conversations that you have with people that I'm like, thank God I don't have to deal with that.
And I just want to say, the last thing I'm going to say is just, if you are a leader of a congregation, I don't care how long you've been leading or how old you are, if you say to yourself, I don't know what my congregation is going to do if I'm gone, then you're not in a great place, and your congregation's not in a great place. That cult of personality is going on.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the senior leader should be valued and important. I'm just saying that God's work continues.
Yeah.
And I think that if it's like, well, I just don't know what they'll do if I'm gone, I'm like, well, that's not healthy.
Yeah.
So
I like the idea of having a liaison at any school that offers Messianic Jewish studies, especially for when it gets into like the MDiv, the masters. Like, there should be someone who is at least, even if they don't live there, who is definitely like interacting with those students and is like, hey, like, because there are some people who are getting, like, for example, Rabbi David's in his MDiv program for with TKU right now for Messianic Jewish studies, but they're, some people may be there and their entire goal is to bring that back to their church, to a church community, to either strengthen a bond, a relationship with the Jewish community, with Jewish believers who maybe aren't walking in a Messianic lifestyle, but just so that there's some kind of strength of knowledge and wisdom there. But there are definitely those who are going there, who are there now and are planning to go, whose intention is to bolster up their ability to teach to preach, to lead Messianic congregations. And if you have, like, because odds are at least 50% of the people in those programs are looking to go the Messianic direction, you've probably got a good pool of people who are, and so, having a liaison there, again, with the strength of the denominational structures, you could have someone whose entire job is to just travel and visit those schools and to recruit them into your like, hey, you want to, spend, 4 years paid after you get your MDiv because how many people leave school and automatically get paid for what they spent 3 to 4 years studying for? Not many. So if you feel a call,
especially in ministry,
and so if you've been, if you feel that God has called you, given you a gifting and a strength to be a teacher, if that's your gifting, that's your strength, and you go to school to enhance that, and you spend 3 to 4 years, and then you have someone who comes up alongside you and is like, hey, would you like the opportunity to be discipled, by several different rabbis in the Messianic movement? Would you like to have that wealth of experience? Boy, have I got the opportunity for you. And that, because then that way, because I can tell you,
but wait, there's more.
But wait, because I can tell you, just from my own school experience, that like most students are not thinking that far ahead. Like, you're just glad to be graduating when you get there. And so you every now and then, it's like the top echelon have thought that far ahead. Usually that's like the law students who already are in firms by the time they're, so that they finish their bar and they move on. But having someone who is like, hey, have you thought of X, Y, and Z? That would be helpful, I think.
Right. And so we've discussed at length in this episode the idea of assistants or associates or people that work alongside in a congregation, and how having a more structured body would allow for feeding those roles. Maybe in a future episode or the next episode or whatever we do, we can talk about 3 other things that deal with the same kind of topic. One is people to start new congregations. There's communities all over the country and the world that don't have other congregations. Number 2 is bringing leaders, unaffiliated congregations that have leaders into the organization, so that there's a broadening of the organization. And then number 3 is talking about a purposeful internship program, which you just were speaking of, where young people not in college, but maybe the year after high school or the year after their first year of college, if they're studying Messianic Judaism, could have a functioning period of time to invest in going to different congregations, experiencing different ways of doing it. So those 3 things: internships, bringing in unaffiliated leaders to strengthen, and therefore, for instance, Rabbi Jonathan actually came from a congregation that's unaffiliated, but we fellowship with them. And so because they weren't part of the union or the IMCS, if we didn't have intentional relationship, I would have not met Jonathan and he would not be where he is. So bringing in, expanding through healthy, independent or unaffiliated congregations, and with the intention of hopefully bringing them into the larger fold. And then also internships and that. So I think those are things that having a more structured affiliation would allow. And again, I totally agree. Haven't heard from the other 2. I totally agree with the idea that if we could get the UMJC and the IMCS to, in some way, whether they fully merged into one, but at least to come to a place where we feed off of each other's strengths in a more unified way.
Even if you have to grit your teeth. I feel like so many people approach that issue with like I have never been so offended by something I 100% agree with. Just get on board.
So with that said, we're going to go ahead and bring this episode to a wrap. I think with every episode we do in this series, we find more episodes that we want to cover. So we're gonna tie back into this some more for a little bit longer. But we're going to go ahead and bring this to a wrap. And we thank you for joining us. Talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.